resources in the setting in which you are, and set out to do it and see how you do, and have some way of evaluating your progress and some way of determining whether we're making sufficient progress to stay the course or whether we should change the course. Does that make sense? But the diagnostic label has been co-opted over the last 100 years or so by what? By institutions who insist that the label be used to determine eligibility for service, or by educational settings who determine that certain labels are necessary for qualification for programming, right? And so when that happens, you create all kinds of dilemmas because diagnostic criteria are always changing. And autism is an interesting one because when terms change, like the term Asperger has left the diagnostic protocol, and yet there are still a lot of organizations and institutions that use that term. Or the term autism has left the diagnostic protocol. It's now autism spectrum disorder, which we could talk about if you want. But the word autism is still written into the educational law, the federal educational law. It doesn't say autism spectrum, and it's never said Asperger. And so when you begin using diagnoses for those purposes, you can create all kinds of problems. So I use diagnoses to assess risk and to mitigate risk over time. So if I say you have autism, then I'm going to use what I know about you and that diagnosis to compare you to a risk group with that diagnosis over time to know what helped them and what hurt them. Maybe we'll discover that women with autism who had blonde hair seem to fare better in life. And so I'll say, well, okay, so you have autism? Dye your hair blonde. Yeah. Now, I'm joking about that, but that's the reality of what we try and do, is understand not symptoms, but risk and protective variables, and try and appreciate what your course might be and how I might reduce the impairment you experience. And really our treatment, and I'll go off on some tangents and then I'll come back, but really our treatment is focused on reducing impairment, not necessarily reducing symptoms. Does that make sense? You know, if you have autism, you will always have autism. You don't outgrow it unless you're Jenny McCarthy's kid. You somehow grow out of it if you ever had it. But you'll always have it. But that isn't the target of our intervention. The target of intervention is impairment. It's reducing impairment. I really don't care whether you have 1 symptom or 10 symptoms, or my goal is to reduce impairment. And one of the dilemmas we've had with diagnostic protocol is that the symptoms that define and describe a child may not be the same symptoms that define and describe an adult. And the new DSM still doesn't have adult criteria for autism, but that will happen probably in the next DSM. And it's already happened with conditions like ADHD, where you meet the diagnostic criteria for the condition, and then you turn 18, and all of a sudden you don't meet the criteria anymore because the symptom protocol changed and you don't fit that symptom protocol. Now, why do I tell you about all this stuff? Because most of you are trying to manage the lives of your children and access services and appreciate risk over time and try and understand what is it I need to do to increase the odds that my child will turn out as well as can be expected. So I'm not as concerned about diagnoses, but if you have questions about it, and I'm going to start with questions once I do this little introduction, but I'm not as concerned about the label per se. And the fact of the matter is that in the DSM, all symptoms are created equal. Does everybody understand how that diagnostic system works? Children have to have 2 of a certain list or 3 of a certain list of symptoms, and you can have 3 or 4 children who overlap in sometimes half the symptoms, but both receive the diagnosis. And once we give the diagnosis, we have an assumption that if you all have autism, then you're all equal, which is not true. And partly that stems from this kind of view that we have that once I give you a diagnosis, that's you, right? Because they'll say the autistic child, as if everything about that child is defined by the diagnostic criteria of that condition, which is silly, because all children share qualities with the whole population of children and qualities that are unique to them. And if you do this, I'm a scientist, so I always try to go back to the science. If you do this, you lose a significant amount of the variance that contributes to good outcome. That by appreciating what children share with all other children, and by appreciating what is unique to them, you're in a much better position to reduce impairment and to help them over time transition than if you do this. And our research on autism is probably going to yield the same results that our research on attention deficit and learning disabilities and anxiety has revealed. Oh, now you're mucking up the show here. Let's see. I'm just trying to get it so everybody can see me.
On the end?
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
That's perfect.
Do you think so? Would that
Perfect.
Yeah.
Choreograph
this.
Sorry about this. And I apologize if I'm a little scattered. I saw patients all day since 8 o'clock till 6, so I'm just kind of trying to get my head around what I want to tell you guys. What were we talking about before I got distracted? No, we were talking about outcome over time and treatment. So if I asked you, so what do you think? You think kids with, let's pick attention deficit, because it's the most researched childhood condition, because it's the most annoying. The conditions we research the most are the ones that are the most disturbing to us. And the conditions that we've researched the least are the ones that don't bother us a whole lot, or are lower incidence. Higher incidence conditions bother us more, we see them more. ADHD. How many people think that kids with ADHD growing up who take medicine turn out to be more functional than kids with ADHD who never took medicine?
No.
It's not true, right? But we used to say that, but we know it's not true. How many people think the longer you take medicine, the better you'll turn out? Not true. You know, what we've figured out is that the things we do for children are important, including the symptom relieving activities, and they may be necessary, but they're not sufficient to change long-term outcomes, which is a little bit of humbling for those of us that sort of have devoted our lives to, hey, I'm gonna take care of your kid, and the things we do today and tomorrow and next year and the year after will make a linchpin difference in what happens to your child over time. But we haven't demonstrated that. It's a little frustrating. We haven't proven that. What we have proven is that the same qualities that lead to a happy, functional life for neurotypical children are also equally important in the lives of neuroatypical children. I use that word neurotypical, neuroatypical, maybe genetic typical, genetic atypical. So that's interesting. So sometimes the very most helpful things we can do for children, the things that really represent ordinary magic, are right in front of us. But children struggle to access those because of their limitations. And so if you know, I had a young man that I saw who, he has social pragmatic problems. Does he have full autism? I don't get caught up in that. What I get caught up in is, how much impairment do you have? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? What kind of things can we do to help you? And we were talking about having a good day. And he told me that a good day is when bad things don't happen. Which was the absence of goodness, which was I thought was a very interesting observation on his part. There is one more chair up here.
Oh,
Yeah, there's one more chair right